I was tagged in a post recently. This post was saying that Black folks, Black individuals, should move back to the South in order to find and express their power into the world. Really, it was a post about a book that had come out that was talking about the root of our power. And it got me thinking about a thought process that I've been going through for a long time that I wanted to share with you today, which is about how to find your power. Welcome to another episode of Social Impact Live. I'm your host, Darrell Coleman. On this episode, I'm going to be diving into the roots of our power and my philosophy on how to create massive social change. So let's get started. So this post got me thinking about where I can be most powerful. And it's a question that I've pondered for a long time and actually have begun to move my life in this direction for a while. And it's something that I wanted to share with you because I think it's really valuable no matter where you are on your social impact journey. So whether you are someone who is just starting out and thinking, what sort of challenge do I actually want to tackle? Or you're someone who has been in the game for a long time, you've been creating social change in one way or another, but you're wondering if you're working in the area where you are most powerful, this episode should be useful for you. So as I think about myself, as I think about the journey that I've been through in my life, one thing, as I've been doing social impact work for a number of years now, that's become clear to me is that I am really interested in issues that affect Black America. I'm really interested in the challenges faced by people who look like me in the United States. I'm really interested in the systems that have been set up and the history of what's been done to and by those with dark skin in America. And what is it that is keeping us from making the progress that we need across society? But specifically, what's keeping the progress that I believe is imminently possible within the Black community from taking place? That's led me to this understanding that there are all sorts of systems that are challenging that exist, and there are all sorts of systems that need to be built within the community itself in order to enable it to reach the heights that it needs to reach. And as I've been thinking more and more about that, and I've been thinking about, okay, well, I have this issue I could focus on, and I also have other issues I could focus on, it's made me reflect a lot on this question of power. And where is it in the world of all the issues I could focus on where I find that I would have the most power? And so as I've thought about that and I saw this post come through on Twitter, I realized, I've actually been moving in the direction of my highest concentration of power, where I believe that is in the first place, which for me, I think is in the South. And I want to explain to you why I think that is, and then how you can use the same framework that I'm using for your own life. So when I think about power, there's a few questions that come to mind. And they really drill down into the root of where we can create the greatest change. So the first question that comes to mind is, where do you have privilege? So a concept that I think about often is this concept of privilege. It's something that we talk about a lot. We usually talk about it right now in society in terms of white privilege and the ability for white people to move through spaces and gain promotions and other opportunities that aren't hindered by their race. Whereas those who don't have white privilege don't have that same ability, and race often ends up being some sort of obstacle one way or another for them. But when I think about privilege, that is one aspect of it. I actually think about privilege as something that every single person on the planet has in one way or another. The question is, where do you have that privilege in comparison to someone else? Right? So when I think about privilege, one really quick or simple way of talking about that would be, what rooms can you walk into where you can speak to people in a way where they will listen to you, they will consider what you have to say, they will think deeply about it, and they may move toward action where someone else wouldn't have the same ability to do that. So an example from my own life would be, I can go into a room full of Black people and I can speak about issues affecting Black America in a way that many white people will not be able to walk into that room and have that same conversation. And then the difference is in the privilege that I have as a Black man in America, as someone with a common and shared experience. So the question for you becomes, where do you have privilege? What rooms can you walk into that others can't walk into and communicate as effectively? I will tell you that while the statement I just said about myself is true, there are other rooms where the audience is mostly white. Maybe the audience is mostly conservative. Maybe the audience is numb to this idea of race. They consider themselves colorblind. They don't think about it, but when they do think about it, it's thrown out as statistics about who's committing the most crime in the country or whatever that might be. Maybe, though, that's an audience that you're able to speak to that I can tell you I don't have as much privilege with. That audience is less interested or has been less interested in listening to what I have to say and entertaining those conversations. Not that they're not interested in arguing with me, but they're less interested in considering whether what I have to say is truly true or not. All right, so that's an element of privilege, and that's a question that we need to ask ourselves as we're trying to figure out, where do we have power? The second question that I have is, where do you have personal experience? Right. So the personal experiences that we have give us an instinctive understanding of what's going on. They give us the ability to sense how other people in the room are going to respond. They give us an ability to understand how things are going to unfold again in the future. It doesn't mean that we're always right, but it does give us an edge, an advantage when it comes to creating change within a given space or for a given group or in a given society. Right? And so that's a question that you want to ask yourself as well. Where do you have an instinctive understanding of what keeps us from making progress versus what doesn't? Right? Those two questions are linked. Where do you have personal experience? And where has that personal experience led to this instinctive understanding of what keeps us from making the progress that we need to make? When I pose these questions to myself, I think about, where do I have privilege? I think about, where do I have experience? I think about, where do I have an instinctive understanding of what keeps us from making progress? Right? I have one more element of that, which is, where do I have relationship and understanding of people? And that is a fundamental element, because it either leads to support, right, or it leads to an understanding of how human beings will respond to a given stimulus, a given initiative, a given effort, and how that effort should be packaged. When you have those things all together, right, when you know where you have privilege, when you know, when you have personal experience, when you know instinctively what keeps us from making progress, and when you have personal relationships and an understanding of the people, when you have those four things together, you have the recipe for creating really powerful social change in that space, because you understand what makes it tick, what makes it move. And so as I've been thinking about the answer to this question for myself, the place where I think that all those factors come together for me is working on issues that affect Black America, which ultimately affects all of America, which ultimately affects all of the world, and working on those issues in the South in particular, a place where I have the ability to walk into rooms as a Texan. I have the ability to speak to people in a way where they're going to listen, they're going to consider what I have to say. I have personal experience because I grew up there, elementary school, middle school, high school. I know what it's like to live in that environment. I know how the environment and the people respond. I have an instinctive understanding of what keeps us from making progress, the beliefs, the ideologies, the ways of thinking. And I also have an understanding of the people, right? I know how people are going to respond. I know what words they're going to use to counter the points that are being said by groups on the outside who don't know how to communicate that way. I know the arguments against change, the arguments against progress. I know the good elements that exist within the arguments that they are saying, right, that are being raised by people who are resistant to creating the change that I think makes sense. And that means that I have the ability to isolate some of those good elements and hopefully include them in some of the change that I believe needs to take place and that I can help take place. And then lastly, right, which is part of that last point, is I also have relationships. My family lives in Texas. My parents live in Texas. My wife's family wants to move to Texas. And so that'll be a support system and center for me and for the work that I want to do that, again, affects Black America, which affects all of America, which affects the whole world. So, I recently had a call with a student where I asked a number of these same questions. It was someone who was interested in getting into the social impact space. And, it's really important that we ask ourselves these questions no matter where we are on this journey. And so for her, she was interested in getting into the space. And when I asked, what are you interested in working on? Who are you interested in serving? It was challenging because there's so many people that she cares about. There's so many people she wants to help, that it wasn't really well defined. It was just people in need. And I think that that is a type of altruism that we should all strive for. At the same time, it's really important that you begin to ask yourself this question: where do you have power to create change? Because wanting to create change in a community and being able to create maximal change in that community are different things. And as I dug into this story with her, she was able to tell me about an experience in her own family, challenges that her family has faced with addiction and other challenges around drug use. And the way that story came out as she talked about it resonated so deeply with me that it had those elements instinctively within it. It had those elements intrinsically within it, where that is a type of issue that she could focus on and she could have power in addressing, because she is able to tell a story about it that no one else can tell. It doesn't mean people can't tell a similar story, but they can't tell that exact story. They can't tell her story. And in that, there is massive, massive power. So as you think about this, you think about who you want to help and where you want to work. I don't think it should keep you from getting started if you haven't started your journey, working on whatever it is that you're excited to work on. We can also develop a greater understanding of something, so we can gain experience in a space. We can gain the ability to speak in a space and credibility in a space. We can, we can gain an instinctual understanding of people. We can gain relationships. We can do all those things. Some spaces it's easier to do than others. Some barriers are harder to cross than others. Barriers of race, barriers of gender, those are challenging barriers to cross oftentimes. Barriers of experience, though, where you want to work with a population who is homeless and maybe you haven't yet been homeless. I mean, that is still a barrier that exists that you need to recognize, but it is one that you might be able to cross a bit easier than some of the other ones. But it is still a useful question for you to start asking. Where do you want to end up applying your efforts and your energy to create maximal change in the world? Where is that? Where can that be? With what population? With whom could you target? Is it women and girls? Is it individuals who are homeless? Is it people who've been incarcerated because you've been incarcerated? Is it Black folks in America and you're a Black person in America? Or is the group that you're looking to benefit a group that you don't have a ton of these overlaps with, and you don't have these personal experiences with, and you don't have these other pieces, right? If that's the case, then you're either going to need to go put yourself in a situation where you can gain those, or reconsider and think, where can you have the greatest impact if you start applying your efforts today? Because I think there's a lot of work to be done in all communities across this country. Even well-off communities have challenges that they face, which presents challenges for other communities as well. The way of thinking of wealthy people in America, right? That affects poor people in America. The way that white people think affects Black people. The way that Black people think affects white people. So all of these issues can be worked on from different angles, and the question just becomes, where are you most powerful? Where can you do that? All right, that's what I've got for you today. That's my episode of Social Impact Live. Come back tomorrow for another episode of Social Impact Live. If this was helpful or you found this useful, please like. If you think there's someone else who might benefit, please do share this with them. Hit the little share button right there. If you're watching this on Twitter, I'd love a follow so that I know who you are and we can begin to engage. We can have more of a dialogue and conversation from there as well. All right, I will see you.